So, good morning, everyone. We're here live on our last webinar for the Young Learners and Teens Week. And we're closing this fantastic week on a very high note with our dearest Valéria França. She'll be talking to us about puppetry in the Young Learners classroom. And I was just talking to Valéria that this is a trauma that I have, that I'd rather walk in a cage with lions than in a young learner classroom with a puppet in my hands. So I hope that this webinar is going to help me overcome those fears. Valéria França is the head of teacher development and has worked at Cultura Inglesa for 26 years. She graduated in education history. She has a master's and a PhD in applied linguistics. Her research interests include teaching young learners and the teaching of languages through artistic expressions and movement exploration in learning spaces. So without further ado, I'll give you Valéria França. Over to you, Valéria.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Eduardo, and thank you all for joining us this morning and for the last week as well, for the Young Learner and Teens Week. It's always very important for us to share and find a way of learning new things and sharing our experiences, and it makes our practice all the much more rich as well. So this morning I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we can use puppets in the classroom. I'm going to look at a few ideas with you. I'm also going to show you a couple of things. Let's see how it goes, because I'm going to be going from slides to the video and see if I manage to handle the technology well. If anything goes wrong, I know Eduardo is there to save me. So the trauma Eduardo has with puppets might be sort of similar to the fear I have of whenever we're doing something live and using technology, something doesn't go right. So we have different fears and different traumas, I suppose. But okay, so let's talk a little bit about using puppets in the classroom. I don't know how many of you watching have already had the chance to use them. I hope you have. I hope on the whole the experience has been good. As anything we do in class, especially when we're working with young learners, we know that things can go wrong. And so maybe it wasn't necessarily the puppets which created the trauma, but the situation would have happened anyway. It's just something we need to bear in mind, because when we work with young learners, anything can happen. It's true that when we're working with puppets, which allows for mediation in the classroom, and it's a number of different types of mediation, and we'll talk about that as well, that we do open ourselves up to a little bit more risk. But then I think, if you go into a younger learner classroom, there are a number of challenges involved rather than risks. So, it's nice to try. So I'm going to now go on to the slides. Bear with me and let me know if you can actually see the slides rather than see me. I hope you can. Just beginning with a nice little image of puppets. We often associate the idea of puppets with puppets which we can manipulate, or hand or glove puppets. But in actual fact, puppets there are a variety of puppets, and even sort of an action toy such as Spider-Man can be a really good puppet. I will tell you a story about a child who used an action toy as a puppet, as a mediator, in a little while. But I'd like to begin focusing on this quotation. Phelan McDermott and Julian Crouch are theatre directors, and they work a lot with puppetry in the shows they create. puppetry is a huge part of the work they do. They do a lot of improvisation work and a lot of movement theatre as well, and use a lot of puppets. So they've become specialists in the use of puppetry in the theatre context. And then you're going to say, but Valeria, why are you bringing the theatre context to our classroom? Because I think there are a number of similarities between what an actor or a puppeteer does on stage and what we're trying to do when we bring a puppet into the classroom. Okay, so I think what Failing and Julian are talking about here is that the moment we agree collectively that we are going to enter a realm of make-believe, or we're going to go into a space where we suspend reality for a moment and we create a new reality, if we do this collectively, it will work. So they're talking about the audience and the players, the actors. And I think this is very much the same in terms of ourselves as teachers and our learners, okay? Normally for young learners, especially very young learners, this ability to go from reality to make believe is very, very, it's a quick process for them. Those of you who have children or who work with very young learners know how easy it is to bring in a character to tell a story, and immediately that character becomes real. As we grow older, we begin to rely much more on the concrete experience, what we actually see is what we believe, our ability to suspend, to go into a situation in which there is something which is slightly different from reality. It's much more difficult for us, but for children it's very easy. So if we manage to bring the puppet into the classroom with a context, with a story which they believe in, they will immediately accept that puppet as something which is real. And then this is when the magic begins in the classroom. When we manage to bring life into a puppet, it becomes real, it becomes an additional element in the classroom, an additional student or an additional friend. I think I prefer the word friend. And this friend is going to be one of our mediators in the classroom. Okay, so that's why they also talk about objects as well. I've seen teachers use objects, so simple objects. It doesn't even have a face or anything. It's an object which suddenly comes to life as well, and that's possible as well. It's the basis of any fairy story, or if you think of Beauty and the Beast and the watch and the candelabra and so on, which come to life and believable. Objects can gain life as well, and we can do that as well in the classroom. Okay, moving ahead, the types of puppets we can use. There are so many puppets we can use. It can be as simple as a cuddly toy. So if you've got a friend, if you don't have children and a friend has children, you can borrow a cuddly toy if you don't have one. Usually these are very good because they have legs, arms and heads. We can manipulate them completely, and I'll be showing you just in a second how we manipulate a cuddly toy. And they can also become the class mascot as well, and be taken home. So the stories can come to life. I always like to give a history, and I'll talk about that to the puppet. This puppet is immersed in our real life. It does things like we do. So here you can see Tigger reading one of his favorite children's book. And so he does things just like our younger learners, okay? Hand and glove puppets are probably the most common ones. I've got a picture there of some of my hand puppets, which are made out of felt, and I just bought these in a shop. The other one is one which I made myself out of cloth. It has sadly lost one of its eyes. I can't seem to find it anywhere, so I have to actually draw its other eye on again. But it can be a piece of cloth which we adapt and sew together to make a hand puppet. Usually hand puppets have mouths as well. They can have, as in the felt puppets, they have ears, and if you stick your fingers, you can make the ears move, or the mouth move as well, or just a normal mouth, okay? Hand and glove puppets can also be sock puppets. So it's something you can make, and I'm going to show you one. So it's nice and easy to make, and something students can make as well, okay? You can make puppets out of paper bags as well. You don't need a lot of material. You can improvise with anything you have at home, or you ask the children to bring. And of course, you've got those little finger puppets or stick puppets. If we think of our young learners, if we think of our very young learners and our young learners, our very young learners still find it difficult to manipulate a lot of things. Their dexterity is still developing. So the use of a finger puppet or a stick puppet is really, really good for a young learner. It gives them the amount of control that they can handle. It's small enough, just like them, so they feel very comfortable with a finger or a stick puppet. As they get older, they won't feel as comfortable. They might transition to a hand or a glove puppet, and as they get even older, a cuddly toy. Okay, so I usually like to think there's no fixed rule. Sometimes I like to show children everything and let them choose a puppet if they're going to use one. Choose what they want to use, or if we're making it with them, let them have a choice of the type of puppet we're making. We can provide them with examples, and they can choose what they're going to make. Okay, a stick puppet, which is just sort of a bit of cardboard cut out and stuck onto a lollipop stick or something, or even a pencil. It can be lovely to use as well. So the fact that it doesn't move the mouth, or it doesn't have hands or ears, it doesn't really matter. It still works. If you have any questions, I know you'll be typing them out, and Eduardo will be sharing them with me. So please feel free to ask questions. So what I'm showing you here is two little photographs I took earlier this morning. I decided to make a sock puppet, and I just wanted to show you how simple it can be. So I just had my son's, well, you know how we lose socks mysteriously in washing machines. Well, this is one of the cases. So we had one of the pairs of the socks, and so I just got a little bit of cards, some buttons, and a piece of string. I didn't have any glue at home this morning, so I used a bit of double-sided sticky tape. So I managed to glue the card to create the mouth of the puppet. I sewed the buttons to make the eyes, and I just, put the string together to make a little bit of hair. This is very simple to make. You can make it in class with the children. Again, I don't think it's suitable for very young learners, because they will find it difficult to cut things out, to sew, and so on. So you can also think of using a sock puppet for younger learners. Ask them to bring in white socks, because with a white sock, you can just paint things on, and they can just put their hands through it and pretend there is a mouth. I'm going to show that to you in a second. If you're feeling really adventurous, you can make papier-mâché puppets. Now, this is very elaborate. It takes time. So it might be something you might consider doing as part of a project rather than your ordinary day-to-day lessons, okay? But you can make it easily just mixing equal amounts of water and flour. You make your sort of papier-mâché paste. And then basically you just get anything you want to use. So it can be 2 halves of an egg carton, which you can cover with, just stick sort of newspaper on it and cover it with bits of papier-mâché and paint over it. There are loads of tutorials on YouTube for you to see how you can make it with young learners, different variations on a theme. The only thing that I always say is that whenever we're making puppets, one of the things we need to pay attention to is that the puppet has to be able to look. I did a puppeteering course at the London School of Puppetry, and one of the things that they made us do was to make the puppets and ensure that it actually was able to look, or at least give direction to it. So how can you make it look or give direction? You either add eyes or you add a nose. There are 2 ways of giving direction to a puppet, okay? I am now going to go back to the video just to show you this sock puppet which I just made. So I'm going to interrupt the screen sharing, okay? And I wonder if you can see here the sock puppet I made. Can you see it?
Yes.
Right? So here's the puppet. It's very simple to make. I just put a piece of card in its mouth and it looks, and it's got a bit of hair. So the important thing of a puppet is when you're using it is that it actually is able to provide direction. So if I'm talking to it, it has to look at me and I have to look at the puppet. If I'm not looking at the puppet, it doesn't seem as if it's real. So one of the first things we need to do is establish eye contact. So I have to say, hello, Mrs. Sock, how are you today? And Mrs. Sock then will begin talking to me and responding to me. And I'll say, do you want to look at our viewers? They're all watching you. Oh, you're feeling a bit scared about this. Okay, but let's go slowly. Have a peek and see what they're looking at. Okay, are you okay with that? Okay, so there she goes. Slowly. Wow, look, the people watching us. Isn't that fantastic? Okay, so very easy to make this sock puppet here. It's got different eyes. It doesn't really matter. And what I said is, you know, if you don't have a piece of card, it doesn't matter, because all you need to do is to put your hand in and the children can sort of, if it's a white sock, draw in eyes, paint a nose or something. But you need to give direction. The direction is where it's going to look at. So it's looking like this. And how you are going to look at it. Okay, so if it doesn't have eyes, it doesn't matter, but it needs to have a nose and it needs to be able to look at you. At least, you know, there's a sort of movement here so we can see we're looking at each other. Okay, so this is the first puppet I wanted to show you. So she's going to say goodbye now, and she's much happier now than she was before. So, but she's going to go say goodbye now, and off she goes, toodling away. And I'm going to go back to the screen now, so I show you my next slide. And it hasn't worked. Ah, yes, it has. Lovely. So breathing life into a puppet. So this is what I tried to do just now. Renee Baker, she's an extraordinary puppeteer. She runs training classes all over Europe. She currently works with the Norwich Puppet Theatre and the Little Angel Theatre as well in London. She's currently running a course for teachers at the Little Angel I think it starts next year, early next year. And she does a lot of work with puppetry with teenagers. In fact, she does a lot of work with teenagers who are in disadvantaged situations. And the puppet is used to bring stories to life. Okay. And what she says is that the puppet is a way of mediating two worlds, right? So we can transition human thoughts and feelings into movement, which can be joined with image and text. And the puppet is, as she sees, a medium and a mediator. If we think about our classroom, because we have got to always to make these connections, this is very, very true. We know that young learners, they go into a language classroom and it is a different world for them, especially the very young ones. They will feel at times a little bit scared. However welcoming we are, it is a new environment. Plus, it's a new environment using a new language. So it can be intimidating. I always mention this, so forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. It is very common and it's very important to allow children to bring something from home into the young learner classroom, because if they've chosen to bring something, that is what is helping them make the bond and the transition between home and the new learning space. To prohibit that object from entering the classroom is to sort of cut that bond and to sever that sense of safety and security. So I always think it's really important to allow kids to bring in objects. And they will bring in dolls and objects and cuddly toys and so on. An example, and I said I was going to go into the example of the action figure. It was happened in Brasilia with a teacher. He told me there was this boy who hardly participated and he used to always bring in his action figures. And he was about to decide not to allow the child to bring in the action figures because he thought it was disrupting the lesson. When the boy came up to him at the end of class and said, in Portuguese, "My action figure is finding it really difficult to understand what you're saying. So when you teach something, can you repeat it to him so that he hears it again and then he is going to learn?" This is one of the finest examples I have of using an object, a puppet, because that toy was a puppet, was a mediator at that moment for the child, to aid learning. It is something which children actually do quite naturally. We find it strange, but they don't. So a puppet can be a very useful mediator in the classroom. It's going to strengthen bonds between students, between the learners and the teachers. It's going to provide this opportunity for revision, for recycling, because the puppet doesn't speak our language. It only speaks the target language. And so we need to naturally go over things again. And the puppet can help us as well go through learning procedures. So the puppet can hold up flashcards. The puppet can hold objects, if it can hold objects. But the puppet can aid us in many, many activities, not only as a source of motivation, but also as a source of learning itself, okay, helping us with the learning that is taking place. So this idea of mediation, which is an idea which comes a lot from research into young learners, especially the work done by Winnicott in terms of the importance of bonding and the importance of allowing mediation to happen with young learners. Puppets provide us this fantastic opportunity to do this, okay? And so at this moment, I'm going to go back we're going to go back to our online to the video as soon as I manage to sort myself out here. I'm trying very hard. So let's go back here to the video. I'm just going to interrupt. And I'm going to introduce to you another friend. And this one's flying in, and he's flown in for miles, haven't you? He's flown in all the way from the United States, because that's where he's originally from. Yes? Okay, right. And so he wants to show you a little bit of some of the things he can do. So he can fly, beat his wings. He can talk to us. He can feel a little bit sad as well, and I can cuddle him. Okay. Children will normally like to stroke your puppets, right? That's very nice, isn't it? He can also wiggle his ears, but I can't right at the moment wiggle his ears, but he can actually wiggle his ears. So the puppets can do loads of things. The important thing is that the puppet has a life history, right? He comes from somewhere, or she comes from somewhere, or it comes from somewhere. You'll notice actually I usually define, you know, if it's a he or she, but it's an animal, so it can be an it as well. There's no problem whatsoever. But the thing is to, when we breathe life into it, to make sure that it exists. So I often tell teachers, you know, when a puppet has joined us, we can't simply remove it from our hands and thrust it into a box, because, you know, children will get very sad about that. They really will, because, you know, you've breathed life into it. It exists. It has a story. It's worked with you for a whole lesson, and then you just chuck it out. Well, you know, that's not very nice. So I think the puppets don't like that, do you? No, they don't. And neither do we. And we don't want to do that, and especially the children, okay? One of the things puppeteers often tell you is that whenever you're working with the puppets, make sure you have a base from which to work on. So with hand puppets, it's much easier because you've got, you know, the length of your hand, so you can pop up your elbow somewhere, and the puppet can actually make eye contact with you because it's at the same level of your eye. If you're sitting on the floor, you can pop up your elbow on your knees, so that gives you extra help. Or you can just work from the basis of a table or something, okay? But basically what we're trying to do is to make sure it has a basis from which to work, because for you as a teacher, it will be much easier to manipulate a puppet if you give it a basis, okay? So you can see what I'm doing with my hand here, right? I'm providing against my arm sort of a base, and this gives me control over the puppet, and this is really important. So I can move it about, I can make it move, we can look at each other, okay? I can flap its wings. So this makes life much easier for us as teachers when we're using a puppet, because otherwise, did you see, it's much more difficult. There is a beauty in the restraint of movement. The puppet doesn't have to be bouncy all over. I mean, it could be a bouncy puppet, okay, depending what type of animal it is. If it's a frog, it would be really nice. This is a bird. It's much more graceful. So breathing life into a puppet means also thinking, what is it? How does it behave? How does it move? Right? So I'm not going to get a bird hopping around, am I? Well, birds actually hop, but not this one. This one's too dignified to hop around, okay? I think he's very majestic, so I'm not going to get him hopping, but he has slower movements. He's very curious as well. So I try and provide a degree of personality. I think about what the puppet is like before I start manipulating it, okay? Which is quite different from this other puppet I'm going to show you now. So we're going to say bye to, I don't know its name yet, but I haven't decided on a name yet, but we need to name puppets as well. We can get the kids to name them. So we're just going to say goodbye, and he's going to thank us, and he's going to fly away. There he goes. And I am going to introduce you to a friend who arrived here because another friend gave him to me. He actually didn't give him to me, he gave him to my son, but I liked him so much that I decided that I would look after it. So he's a very curious sort of chap, and there he comes. Here he comes. He's trying to see what we're doing. What are we doing? So he's just going to give you a little wave. Hello. Hello, how are you? Hello. So here we have Tigger. Okay. Now Tigger is a very, very curious sort of animal, aren't you? And the beauty about Tigger is that he is so soft and he is so cuddly. You like that, don't you? Yes, that he's wonderful to manipulate. With soft toys, if you hold the head like this, you can give tons of movement. Look, which is much easier to do, but really grasp the head, the back of the head, and you can give movement. Again, can you see I'm holding him? If I hold him, I can actually manipulate his head. And because he goes up and down, he's so expressive that it's completely different. And he's so fun, and he's so curious and full of life, and a very intriguing animal, this one. Of course, he waves. He's got two arms, so I can hold. So, oh dear, what happened there? I've lost my camera. Sorry. Eduardo, can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you, Valeria.
Okay, I've lost myself, but I'll find myself in a while. So what we can notice then is that I'm still holding him. Can you see? He's got his legs. He's got a lovely tail as well. So in the classroom, he can actually sit on your desk like this, okay, which is really great. Or he can sit on your lap if you're sitting on the floor. And you can still hold his head, manipulate his arms, okay? If you're not, you can move this arm, okay? You can't really move both. It's a bit difficult. He can say yes, he can say no, and he can also walk because he's got the legs, okay? So this is really, really nice to work with. I'm just going back to my slides now. Let's go back here. The important thing is to create the expectation when the puppet arrives. Just introducing the puppet out of the blue is not going to work. Create a context, create a reason, create expectation. So the lesson before the puppet arrives, tell them, you know, next lesson, we're going to have a really special visitor. And that will help a lot. It will raise the expectation. They'll be wondering who the visitor is. And you've created this sort of degree of excitement which we want when the puppet first appears, okay? It also gives them time and preparation for the fact that something different is going to happen. And this is important because we as adults, we live a very fast-paced life, and we're used to understanding that we change from one activity to the next without even thinking. Children don't really do things that way. Children need a bit of time. Every child needs a bit of time to transition from one thing to the other. Some children who have additional needs need more time and need greater markers of transition, okay? And so to let them know that something is going to happen, prepare them for a new situation is in fact a very wise teaching practice to adopt in your classroom, okay? When you've got the puppet, make sure that the learners are looking at you, or at least looking at the puppet. And there are a number of ways we can do this. If they're looking at you, if you've got them in a circle and they're looking at you and they're looking at the puppet, there's absolutely no need for you to raise your voice. What I've generally found is that once the excitement dies, or you know, the puppet has appeared and they, you know, there is a level of excitement. But if we begin lowering our voices, we begin engaging them into the world of the puppet. So it is a good idea to lower voices, get them to sit closer to you. Okay, there's no need to sit in a huge circle far away. They can bunch up closer to you. Use your voice and your actions to get their attention. And you can do that through the puppet. So I always tell teachers, you know, if you're going to use a puppet, rehearse in front of a mirror. Find out who your puppet is. Find out how it moves. Find out what it likes, what it doesn't like. Create a story for it. And you feel comfortable with it when you're using it with the children. So that does mean spending a couple of minutes literally in front of a mirror. It's your opportunity to make a fool of yourself, if you say it that way. But it's a good thing because you begin understanding the limits, and you also begin as a teacher understanding your own limits, right? When we're using puppets, and it can be difficult because it's not easy, we've got to understand what our own limits are as well. And if we understand what our limits are, then we're fine, okay? The puppet, and this is something teachers often ask, does the puppet have to speak? No, it doesn't have to speak because it's a mediator. So puppets can speak, but they don't have to. And I think this is something teachers fear, is actually giving voice to the puppet. But actually what we want to do is we want to use the puppet as a way of giving voice to the students, to the learners, right? So it's the learners who have to talk, and they can talk to the puppet and the puppet talks to us. Or we talk to the puppet and the puppet hands something to the children and they do something using their own voice. But the puppet itself doesn't have to speak, but it understands English only, okay? And the last point I'm making there is to the importance of giving it a story, history, as it were. I've actually already, for this, this picture, you can see me using a puppet called Bear. It's a commercially made puppet. It is absolutely, it's one of the best puppets I've ever worked with. If you're at all interested, check it out. It comes with fantastic resources on how to use it. It's simply wonderful. And so what I did is I did its own photo album. Bear was doing loads of things. And it was during the World Cup, I think like a couple of years ago, perhaps 8 years ago already. And Bear had its own photo album. So because Bear brought in its own little photo album, it was interesting because the kids could relate to its life history as well. Children have a short life history because of their ages, and Bear also has a life history, and they can relate to things, and I think that's really lovely. And I think one of my final slides is the idea of letting learners play. We have in the materials we use often suggestion of role play activities. Sometimes it already comes with a suggestion of stick puppets, or you might even have a full-blown hand glove puppet or a cuddly toy puppet, which is wonderful, fantastic. You don't need to limit yourself to that, but you can use that. But sometimes learners want to use the puppet beyond what we have designed for them in terms of what we're using in our materials. And I think it's very important to allow them that degree of freedom, as it were, because they're the ones who are going to be able to create the stories and to use the language. And at the end of the day, that's what we want them to do in creative manners. If if they are able to decide how they want to use the puppet to tell a story, they will feel immediately safe in that context, because it's coming from them, it's their creation. And then they will be able to tell their own stories. You'll find students, learners, will want to tell stories in different ways with different puppets. And that's fair enough, you know. It's very interesting because your very young learners, they won't. Sometimes teachers say, well, you know, if a child is able to make, you know, a really nice sock puppet, but the other one's only able to make a finger puppet, won't they feel, you know, lessened if they've only made a finger puppet? My experience is that no, they don't, because they've produced what they wanted to produce, and they're happy with that. And that's probably a good indication of how far they can go. So there's no point in us forcing them to go beyond that in terms of the creation of the puppet. It's their own ideas, it's their own desires, and that's very, very important. And that allows them to play with a degree of enthusiasm, with a degree of feeling safe, right? This photo is a photo of my niece using a glove puppet, which unfortunately I seem to have mislaid somewhere. I think he's gone off to visit the world. He's gone walkabout, and but a couple of months ago he was still living here, and so she went through a phase. She's 11 now, where she was experimenting with loads of puppets and toys and creating puppets herself, and she was using this to actually experiment with her English. And it's quite interesting because whenever she wanted to talk to me in English, she wouldn't talk straight to my face in English. She would actually use a puppet. So it was as if another character was using English, and if it made mistakes, that was fine. You know, it was the puppet, it wasn't her. And so that also allowed me to correct her much more than I would have if I was just talking to her. She provided me a perfect alibi to work on language, and it allowed her to narrate a number of interesting stories of things which were tasks that were going through her head. But she did this in her own free time. So children will play, and they will use the puppet to mediate any type of learning situation. Well, I'm going to go back now to the video, because I think that was the last slide I wanted to show you. And if we go back to the video now, I'll be able to, whoops, something's gone funny here. I'm going to just go back to the video so we can actually see each other. And I wonder if you have any questions or anything you'd like to ask Eduardo.
All right, Valéria, we've got some questions here. Just before we go to the questions, it was amazing. It was fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us. And all the questions I had, you answered them. So it was brilliant. It was really brilliant. There is just one thing that I would like to ask. When you mentioned about the voice, the puppets don't need to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But if they do, how do you usually do your puppets usually speak? I mean, and how do you do that?
Okay, the puppet can speak, and if you've created the correct atmosphere for the puppet to appear, it will come to life anyway. So it can speak, and it doesn't have to speak. So Tiger can actually speak. He doesn't have to have a different voice from me, but I have to have the feeling that he's speaking. So when we speak, we usually look at someone. So I think the most important thing is when we're using a puppet which speaks is to understand where it's going to be looking. So if, for example, you ask me a question and Tiger is going to answer. So now Tiger is going to answer the question. So I think I speak, and I speak clearly enough. But when I speak, I have to look at you. This is the important thing. Okay,
right.
it's the way we use the puppet. I'm awful at using accents and changing voices. This has never been a strong point of mine. So for my comfort, and this is what I say, it's up to the teacher and your comfort zone. My
Okay.
puppets will never speak. But if it did speak, I have to make sure that it's looking at the person when it's speaking, because that's how we speak. Otherwise, it's not believable. Okay?
Yeah. And what, just by the way you demonstrated now, like while Tiger was speaking, like, I was looking at him, not at you. So
Right, exactly.
that's what pretty much what happens to kids. So it really does not matter if you use a different voice or not. It's what really matters is where your students will be looking at.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
fantastic. Okay, we've got two questions from the YouTube
Mm-hmm.
participants. The first one is, um, Alessandra asked, "Do you use puppets in every class, or you use puppets for specific moments? How does that work for you?" How
Okay, so well, I have to say I don't have regular classes anymore.
okay.
So I'm not in the classroom teaching context on a regular basis. Um, you don't have to use it every class. I think as a teacher, there are moments where you want to use the puppet, and there are moments you don't want to use the puppet. The puppet can mediate those moments where you think it's going to be important. So you don't have to feel obliged to bring it out every lesson.
Okay.
And I think that's the best way to deal with it, your decision. Um, Obviously, with young learners, what you can't do is go a whole month without using the puppet, because then they're going to forget that it exists. Okay, that's the only thing.
I see. All right. So, and also I think that for students, the puppet is a surprise element. It's not part of their routine. And I think, I don't know, the way I see it, if you use the puppet in every lesson, it becomes a routine, and then it kind of loses its magic. I don't know
Yeah,
if
I think
I don't,
so. Yes,
I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying.
it does. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
We also have another question that you've mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Kids can create their own puppet. And
Mm-hmm.
we let them use their puppets in class. And do you usually have a follow-up activity to that, or I don't know, just by asking you this question now, you shed some light on my mind that we could perhaps train the kids to use the puppet and show their parents what they've learned or something like that. How do you usually work when the kids produce their puppets?
I think the puppets produced by okay, I think there are two types of puppets which are produced. Those puppets which are part of a course material, and I think I'd like to make the difference between puppets which are part of course material and puppets we decide to make of our own accord. Because I
Okay.
think they take on slightly different roles. The puppet which comes part of a course material, it will be brought up within the course material itself. It will there are activities designed for it to be used, right?
Okay.
So I think that's one thing, and I think that's fantastic, way of using a puppet. The puppet which you decide to create, a sock puppet, to mediate learning, that one gives you much more freedom of use, as it were, I think, because you can bring it, the children can decide to bring it in. You can decide everyone brings in the puppet. For example, you're going to sing a new song. Why don't you bring your puppet so we sing the song together? And then the puppets sing as well. Or we can decide it's a presentation for parents, or we can decide that the puppet is there to tell narratives or stories they're going to create. They might decide, sometimes children are very influenced by what they see and hear. So even if you decided not to use the course material puppets, I think you'll find that because the children are getting those stories and they have the characters in the course material, chances are they will design puppets which, in a way, reflect the course material they're using.
I see.
Yeah, so I think we can see both things happening. The children who will who will refer to something they've seen on TV or a video or the classroom itself and build their creativity on top of that. And those who are able to go way beyond what we know they're looking at and seeing and create something totally different. I think we get a chance to do that and make really widely different puppets when we give them more time. That is not really the reality of your day-to-day classroom in a language school context, but within a school context, it can be part of the reality when you provide more time to work on the creation of puppets, because it will work together with your arts class and crafts class, for example. Okay.
And don't you think that, I mean, this is me thinking and reflecting upon everything you're saying. Don't you think that when students produce their own puppets from scratch, there is some sort of emotional involvement and attachment compared to the puppets they use from their course books?
Absolutely, because this is exactly what's going to happen. When we paint something, when we draw something, if we're adults or children, a little bit of us is going to be transferred to that painting, to that drawing. When we make a puppet and we're taking decisions how we're going to make a puppet, if we do it individually, as we're crafting the puppet, a lot of us is going to come into that puppet. And so it is more than natural that ideas, deep thoughts, and emotions will also be transferred to that puppet. Very difficult to say what will be transferred, but without a doubt, something will be transferred, and it can make it much more interesting for the child to use as well. So it's got a little bit of them in it, as it were.
Yeah. And there's also what you mentioned about your niece, on how you were able to correct her and how she felt safer to using it. It was not her who were the person who was making the mistakes, it was the puppet.
Yes. But this is the power of mediation a puppet has, because she's not going to see it as, she doesn't see it as her making a mistake, it's the puppet.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, you know, the way, and she's 11 years old, so you would have thought by this age there is a complete awareness that it is a puppet, and it's, but at the same time it's good to, you know, let the puppet take the blame, as it were, for something.
Definitely. It was fantastic, Valeria. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us on a Sunday morning. So before we wrap it up, I would like to talk a little bit about the certificates for this session. I'll be sharing my screen so people can actually see the link. So just doing that in a second. Oh, just hold on. There we go. So this is the link for the certificate: bit.ly/BrELT YLT Week 2018 certificate, all lowercase letters. Certificates will be awarded only to those who attended this webinar live. So the link will be actually open for the next 30 minutes. And in case you're watching this session recorded later, unfortunately, you will not be awarded a certificate. And this is the very end of our Young Learners Week. So we would like to thank all the incredible speakers we've had. We would like to thank all the participants who attended the sessions. We'd like to thank also all the speakers through the Instagram stories. We have a selection on our Instagram profile with practical tips that you can watch. We've had stories throughout the week with fantastic professionals as well. So if you're interested in looking for more practical tips other than the amazing tips Valeria gave us in this webinar, you just go to our Instagram profile. And In 2 weeks, we will be posting a handbook of the Young Learner Week, which will contain reflections on the webinars from the keynote speakers, as well as articles from the guest speakers, and other articles that people submitted on our call for papers. So stay tuned for more news. Thank you very much, Valeria. Have a fantastic
Thank
day.
you. You all as well. Have a lovely Sunday.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.